Welcome to Conversations on Healing and Growth. I'm Ben Umstead.
And I'm Martin Perkins.
So, beginning our podcast today in the new year, we've been diving into some spaces that have proven to be quite exciting and invigorating, but very rich and dense. We are fascinated with the history of emotion, how human beings have felt over time in these ideas that we all don't experience emotions the same way in our present time, and we don't experience emotions the same way from our ancestors. We were really excited to start exploring this topic and figure out a way to make it our own. But that's going to take some time. That's what we figured out today. And so as we started our meeting, you paused and said to me, "Hey, I need to do some writing. I need to check in with myself."
Yeah. So I think rather than going to an explanation of the writing, I'm going to share the writing itself.
That sounds great.
I woke up this morning feeling generally well. I had slept well, meditated, restarted the fire in the wood stove, and had a nourishing breakfast. As we began to discuss the next podcast, I felt a sense of malaise, a disconnect. It felt like a disconnect from the subject matter, but in truth it was something else. Not a problem to fix, not something to work around, it was something different. Not really a disconnect from myself either, as I was aware of the feeling. It didn't feel great, but it also wasn't something I was pushing away. Instead, it was a sense of being, a need to be where I am in the malaise rather than focusing on a subject matter that would require me to move into a deeply cognitive process. At this point in the meeting, I asked Ben to give me some time to do some soul writing. And as I moved deeper into the writing, it felt less and less like a malaise or a disconnect and more like a much needed redirect. A soul-led redirection into something that felt right here, right now. A recognition that listening, writing, expressing this feeling just as it is amongst the most misunderstood experiences for humanity in today's world. I offer that I don't have a problem inside that needs to be fixed, and I sincerely mean it. That what I know is that the feeling needs to be felt, to be expressed. It needs time and space. I have learned that in doing so, I no longer get stuck in emotions like anger or deep sadness or melancholy. I give it the time and space needed for processing rather than pushing it away or burying it or redirecting it so I can move on in my life into something more productive. Instead, it is acknowledged, given expression, and a healthy outlet. This experience I'm describing has particular pertinence here in the stillness of winter, but in practice, it's needed year-round. It needs us to acknowledge these kinds of feelings that arise, when they arise. When I reconnected with Ben within our Zoom conversation and shared this writing, we decided this was going to be our podcast. Not everyone can redirect such soul writing into a creative outlet like a podcast in such a direct way, but we can all allow ourselves this needed space. A space that at its core provides a depth and a freedom within ourselves, so that any feelings we experience don't become more habituated in us, and over long periods of time, concretized in our being. I described it in my writing as a malaise, a disconnect.
Yeah. Or it felt like a disconnect, right?
Right. And as I redirected it, or as it redirected me in the writing, what I came to realize is that, and I've realized this 100 times, 1,000 times in my writing, is the recognition that when I give myself the space to be right where I am, transformation truly is accessed. And if I had stayed with the subject matter which was at the time of the beginning of the meeting, it felt inaccessible. I didn't know how to connect to it. And it feels very rich that what I'm describing in terms of my process, I would offer our forebears had a great deal more access to inherently. That the history of emotion in a world where the pace is radically slower avails human beings or availed human beings and does avail human beings today who choose it something radically different than what our world is offering us right now, as to almost make you feel as if you're like somehow disconnected from the world around you and its hectic reactive pace.
And what I've learned by making sure that I step into this space that you're describing, it doesn't feel like a disconnect as much as just a different perspective that's happening within the larger experience, the shared experience. And I think that's the thing that's really challenging, in addition to the space itself, the hyper busy, hurry and scurry, as our friend Linda described in our last episode around stillness. This becomes that obstacle. We go, well, it's an obstacle. I can't give time to be in that space to process. I have to push it away or redirect it so that I can be more productive, right? Like you noted, this can happen. It's easy to feel that that's the correct way to feel. I think that quite often, I know I've been in these spaces, so imagine other people have had their version of it, that I mistake the redirection as feeling the feeling, as expressing it. Oh, okay, if I redirect it first, then I'll ultimately, I'm feeling it. Okay, I acknowledge it. I know that I'm not disconnected from it. But what you noted earlier was acknowledging it, and through making that space, then it transforms. And I think that that's really important to speak to, that that's different from just redirecting. Taking the time to embrace, to hold, to shape, to feel, that's where the transformation actually happens. The redirecting is a whole other thing. And I know that I've confused that in the past.
When you say redirecting, what I hear you say is just sort of overriding.
Overriding. Yeah. The cognitive overriding, right?
Yeah. And I think that you're pointing to something really crucial there when you say it's cognitive. We dwell in stories, and a lot of our stories around life carry a level of expectation. If we're not practiced within ourselves, there's a lot of expectation, right? And then it's accompanying disappointment when we don't meet that expectation. And I think there's a lot of awareness that needs to be brought to that aspect of being human, right? The question isn't whether or not we have those feelings of associated with expectations or deep sadnesses or frustrations or anger, because I could have easily gone to the place of being frustrated with myself because I wasn't really able to access the cognition needed, the processing power needed to go to this information. Instead, I needed to access it through my own feelings. Because on some level, we're having a similar conversation around feeling. We're just having it from a feeling place rather than from a cognitive place. And therefore, a much more sort of intuitive place with it, right? Because I have a sense of a deep knowing, especially in this day and age, that human beings who are practicing, in whatever version it might be, practicing with being deeply present in the world and with themselves, they're feeling something very different. Their notion of any of the words that we use, and I'll speak for myself, in speaking of any of the emotions, happy, sad, angry, anxiety, worries, all of these things I've taken with clients and with students and in conversations with people who I'm aware are willing or able to have the conversation, I ask the question, what do you mean by these feelings? What is your practice with it? Because how we practice with something, how we are with it, largely defines it. It isn't just that we have the feeling, but how we act in ways around it. If, for instance, a human being is deeply addicted to being happy, and you can be very addicted, the pursuit of happiness means something radically different today than that phrase as it was originally used by our forebears. It means something radically different. This idea that we need to go out and find the next endorphin rush. And it's often, sadly, centered around, in our culture, around consumption. What's the next reward for overworking ourselves? There's a quote that I really do think it comes from Darwin. And I really believe that this sort of Darwinian notion is, and it's not just Darwin. I mean, this was deeply ingrained in prior generations. And the quote is, "A man who dares to waste 1 hour of time has not discovered the value of life." Now, on one level, I could say, well, what does Darwin mean by waste an hour? Does he mean waste it by not being present, by not being here? And if that's what he means, I can totally get on board with the quote. But in order to get on with the quote, we have to look upon what I did prior to the podcast and going to the journaling. We have to acknowledge that that's not a waste of time. That delving into my own feelings, taking that time is not a waste of time. It brings depth and meaning and, on a certain level, freedom into my being, because I get to actually not carry around some negative self-story about, I'm not able to do this, or I'm not able to do that, or whatever the inner story would be that would develop because I didn't process that feeling of malaise or disconnect. And it really wasn't malaise or disconnect, it was a soulful redirect. I would offer, if a conscious person is going to acknowledge Darwin's quote as truth, then it needs an acknowledgement that to waste an hour of time is to do so by not being present, by not being here, by not being in touch with who we are, right? And that's, in many ways, how we more deeply reconnect with the value of life.
And not only that, but hearing Darwin describe that and asking ourselves this question, what does he mean? And is it about presence? Knowing that if each person is showing up in their own way, that's going to look different. So it gets back to that sense of people feeling their feelings, and it's not going to be the same for you. It's not going to be the same for me. But what is the same is that we step into the journey, that willingness to step into those places, because you said it felt like a disconnect. It felt like malaise. But in turn, it was a redirect. So you needed to have that moment of, oh, this feels like malaise. I'm not going to be able to step into that deep cognitive process that this stuff requires right now. That doesn't feel good. I didn't necessarily expect that. Maybe I had expectations around that. Okay. And the thing is that that's not a measurement of time. I want to really emphasize that too, because we live in a world of consumption and filling ourselves up. That linear space, logical space, that rational space. It's not a measurement of time. Each of us are going to feel this a little different. It was continuing to meet the moment and go, okay, I'm not disconnected. I'm not feeling malaise in the sense that it's rooted in me now, and I'm going to stay there for however long period of time. It was being playful with it. I think that's the thing that I realize in listening to your writing and extrapolating on this stuff with you right now. It really does get back to, how am I going to be with it? And we talk about that all the time. And more, I feel the significance, the importance of How will I play with this part of myself? Because I think what's happened over the last 150 years, especially as sciences have developed and a curiosity and inquisitive quality that is inherently within all of us, has become orthodox and messianic. Like we look at Darwin as this like de facto figure. We look at Sigmund Freud as this de facto figure. And I think that's the thing. There's truth to be found in everyone's work, but it doesn't have to run the show, because the aspect that I'm realizing now as we talk about this is our language has developed to speak to our feelings, our emotions, as if they're characters coming in from somewhere else when they're just elements of who we are. We treat ourselves and we treat our emotions as alien. And I think that is why when we practice presence, when we're here and acknowledge, like today, that sense of malaise and how to transform it rather than step away from it. This is a uncomfortable truth that comes up, an edge that comes up for me. I see, yes, but I feel the unacknowledged edge for many, many, many other people. I go, if I'm feeling this in a vulnerable, tender, open-hearted way, if this is how I'm feeling, how are other people feeling? I have expectations around that, right? I want to empathize. I hope that others are feeling deeply. And sometimes I see very direct evidence that says they want to feel deeply and they're constantly redirecting that innate desire to feel deeply. And that's why they're so exhausted. But that's a story too. And so when that comes up, I go, that says more about me and how I've felt on my journey than any projection that I'm making. Ah, it's recognizing those points where I've othered my feelings for the sake of a story, a larger story, for the sake of a structure.
Right. And it's important to recognize that in not seeing two shores, but instead one river, what we're not talking about is one answer, right? And that scientific pursuit for the answer. I think that there's a way for the scientist and the poet to coexist in this world so that we can acknowledge that there can be many answers. And the tragic notion that we experience today is that we ask a question that only 3 years ago would have been met on Google with hundreds of answers, and now there's one answer that dominates the question. And all the other answers are buried now, unless we are very aware and we ask the question without AI. Then we get lots of answers, lots of possibilities. And the experience that I'm describing today is the acknowledgement that there's my answer, and there's Ben's answer, and every listener's answer to this exploration of, in this moment, I don't feel connected to the meeting at hand, the what at hand. What's that really about? Is it about the subject matter? Or is it about something else? Will I give myself some space to explore what's going on inside of me? To jump back to the Darwin quote, a man who dares to waste 1 hour of time has not discovered the value of life. So what do you value? And along those lines, we made mention in our last podcast, the 7 questions.
So we made mention of these 7 questions around the moment, and we included it in the newsletter that went out over the new year.
And by the time this podcast goes out, it will be a blog entry on the website. So folks can go and access this, which is really an exploration of what and how we can access more deeply our own personal sense of values as they exist in relation to presence and being in the moment.
Right. And that's the lovely thing about this, is that we began this morning in a place where there was a wealth of material, a lot that we wanted to dive into. And we both knew in our own ways that that material as it was, we were going to have to take a different route. We weren't quite sure what that was going to turn into. But here we are speaking to what we actually wanted to in our own way, not looking at and reviewing and regurgitating all of these different academic perspectives. They're extremely valuable and very exciting. But the question that we had at the core was, how do we make this our own right now? How do we bring it into our conversation, which is always coming back to that lens of how are we healing? How are we growing? Because I don't want to concretize that, right? I think that's something really important to be said as how did I heal and grow? How I made this choice, putting it in that lens locks it down rather than how am I doing it right now with you as I speak these words and you respond and nod and listen.
Right, right, right. It's interesting because what you're describing is a willingness to look at life with fresh eyes, right? While at the same time acknowledging the deeper commitments that we've made in our lives. I know for me personally, one of the commitments that I've made to myself is to heal and grow. That when I do get discouraged, I'm able to access that commitment to myself and reconnect to it over and over and over again. To practice deeply, to go to uncomfortable places.
Because that feeling discouraged is a part of it. Like, that's the thing. We have separated these things so much and go, well, you can feel this, what is right, what is wrong. And like you noted in your writing, there wasn't a problem to fix. I think that's a really good contemporary way to put it. There's no problem to fix. We just have to create the space for ourselves to feel with depth and freedom whatever is going on for us. Conversations on Healing and Growth is produced by Ben Umstead and Martin Perkins, with editing and music by Ben Umstead.